We have never gotten quite the clamor for a review as we have for Strange Darling. And we had planned on talking about it anyway, but now I'm so excited that you guys are so excited about it. And I'm delighted that my good friend William Bibbiani is here. You know him better as Bibbs, a frequent visitor to us here at Breakfast All Day. Hello, Bibbs.
Hi.
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 Hi. So
Hi.
here's what I think we're going to do. I want to give a quick little description of this, and then we'll just get into spoilers, and we're going to go into it. So if you have not seen this film yet, you might want to visit that part later. Some people like spoilers ahead of time. I am so glad I did not know anything about this film going into it.
Agreed.
I knew, it was buzzy. I knew that. And I knew that Giovanni Ribisi was a cinematographer.
That's all you need. That's all you need.
Okay, so real quick, you guys subscribe if you have not, because we love movies like this. This right here is the kind of thing that we do all the time. And so I'm thrilled that you guys are here with us. If you're not subscribed yet, we would love to have you.
Here, kitty, kitty, kitty.
You believe it?
Here, kitty, kitty, kitty.
Spoiler free, real fast. Willa Fitzgerald and Kyle Gallner are having a one-night stand, and it goes awry. They meet and they hit it off, and it's very flirty and sexy, and then it keeps changing. And it is not at all what you think it is going to be. I loved this movie, and I want to get into it more once we can. But I can say unequivocally that you should check it out, especially if you like original storytelling, if you like twists, if you like really gonzo performances. This has all of that. So that is my spoiler-free review. Da-da-da! Are you ready to get into it now?
Oh, let's get into this thing.
Into it. Okay, Bibb, so what really happens here?
Okay, so, and again, spoilers. Spoilers. Okay, so this is a story that is told in 6 chapters, and it's told out of order. And it's told out of order so that the actual cat...
Hi, Kitty.
Okay. So it's told out of order so that the actual reasons for everything going on and who is responsible for what... Hi, Kitty. It's told out of order when the movie begins. Willa Fitzgerald is on the run from Kyle Gallner, and she is being hunted in the woods. We then cut around a bit. We cut ahead to when she's hiding from him in a house, and a couple of people are dead, and we don't know how that happened to happen in the middle. And then we cut to the beginning, and it looks like... Well, yeah, it looks like everything was kind of cute, and they were like flirting, and they were getting into some business, and yeah. So you think Kyle Gallner is a serial killer, and he's hunting her, and it's awful. And the twist, and it's a twist that happens so early in the movie that it's impossible to discuss the movie in any detail without discussing it, which I think is rude to film critics. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that in a second. I have a whole theory about that, but basically, the twist is she's the serial killer and he's not. And she tried to kill him, and now he's after her. And I won't tell you where it goes from there.
You can. Well,
I can. Well, there's no point in getting into it right now because, frankly, here's the thing about the movie is that when it gets right down to it, if you put all of this movie in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, rather than splitting it up, it's a pretty straightforward series of events. It's actually a little uncomplicated. It only takes place over so many locations. It's a very small number of characters. It's a surprise serial killer story with a lot of bang for your buck. But it's not told in order, and that's the trick here, because the way they want this movie to play out is to surprise you by making you make assumptions about what's happening. You assume that because the film opens with Willa Fitzgerald running away from Kyle Gallner as he's trying to kill her, that he's the bad guy, that he's the villain here. But as you learn more, you realize that your assumptions, you, the audience, were mistaken. But here's the thing with that. To what end is my question? Because I admire so much of this movie. I think the performances are fantastic. Giovanni Ribisi, well-known actor, remember the Mod Squad? He's a great cinematographer. I'll give him credit. Like there is so much impressive camera work that manages to not call too much attention to itself. It's not like, hey, Mom, watch me dive. It's actually like fitting the material and elevating the material while still being true to the material. All of that is really, really great. But if the point of the movie is to take a situation in which you think a woman might be the victim of male violence, but it turns out she's the real bad guy, the question that this asks, and it's a tough question, how responsible is that? That's the real question here. And that's a horror movie. It doesn't have to be responsible. But if at the end of the movie, you might take away the idea like, women, right? That would be horrible. And I'm hoping that's not the case. Because other than that, if you remove it from any of that sort of larger sociological context, this is just a riveting, twisty thriller. Incredibly well done. But thematically, it pushes some boundaries that I wonder if everyone is going to find that in good taste.
I don't think it is trying to be in good taste or bad taste. I think it intends to upend our notions of genre tropes and gender roles.
To what end?
It does. To what end? To surprise us. To be exhilarating.
If that's all there is to it, is that, and here's the question, if that's all there is to it, is that potentially a little superficial? And here's the deal, that's not necessarily even a bad thing.
If it's entertaining, who cares?
It is entertaining. One might. And that's the thing. It's all a matter of taste, isn't it? That's all film criticism is. We're discussing our taste and how we reach it. I do think it's interesting that when you tell a story in which a twist happens in the middle, you make it difficult for people to talk about your movie in advance because we care so much about spoilers. But you also make it difficult for people to engage with the movie on its intended level. I call this the red eye effect. Remember Wes Craven's Red Eye, which the first half hour seems like a cute romantic comedy, and then it turns out Cillian Murphy has kidnapped Rachel McAdams in public. If you were reading the script, or if you'd seen the movie with no preamble whatsoever, you might be really surprised by that. But you can't really sell it that way. This movie gets away with that because it's still a scary serial killer movie regardless. You'll get people into the theater.
It's suspenseful.
But it does make it tricky to talk about what the film is really getting at. And I'm glad we're able to talk about it with spoilers because I don't think everyone would be. And I think sometimes spoiler culture is perfectly wonderful and valid and gives people an opportunity to see the movie fresh. But sometimes it really makes it difficult to have meaningful critical conversations. I'm really thrilled by the filmmaking itself. I'm still thinking about the movie in terms of where does this fit in to the art form right now? What is the statement that they're trying to make? Because I think subverting expectations is a good thing. But is it the only thing? It's a question worth asking whether or not you agree with it or not, I think.
Yeah. JT Mollner is the writer director here, my fellow SMU Mustang, go Ponies. And what he's made is like a horror version of Pulp Fiction. This movie has a lot of Pulp Fiction in its DNA in the scrambling of the timeline, the nonlinear narrative, and how it drops you in the middle and then jumps back and then things make sense and then jumps forward and things are confusing again and then jumps back and things make sense. And so I enjoyed the puzzle of that. That was a lot of fun. Challengers is kind of like that too, in that Challengers, jumps around in time and things that didn't make sense the first time make sense now. And here it's as little as like, there's the overhead shot of Kyle Gallner, who they refer to as the demon, by the way, in the opening titles. And this is part of why it sets you up to think who these people are.
And there is a reason for that. That's not just misleading. There's a narrative reason why he would be called that. That
makes sense too. That she's the lady and he's the demon. So it sets it up with her running for her life in slow motion through a field. Like, of course, he's chasing her. He must be the bad guy, whatever. There's an overhead shot of him and there's like frozen turkeys and like frozen food strewn about in the yard. And you're like, what the hell? Why are those pieces of food there? Right. And then it makes sense. So it's little things like that. So I thought that was kind of fun and it rewards you for paying attention. And it's the kind of movie that you're going to want to see again if you enjoyed it the first time, just to pick up on the clues of things that maybe you missed that will make sense and be richer with further viewings.
And that's an interesting thing when you build a movie around this many twists. Is the twist all that matters, or when you watch it again, does knowing exactly how the events play out enrich the experience? And I think that's the mark of a good. I think so too, and I think that's a mark of a good twist. I actually really admire the storytelling here because every single chapter that is told out of context, where we're just kind of almost memento, just start picking it up as we go along, is incredibly engagingly presented. We talked about Giovanni Ribisi's camera work, but the score is incredibly powerful in a way that I think I feel like too many filmmakers are afraid to let the score really tell the story. A lot of people's scores
strings,
like Bernard Herrmann, John Williams, all of these fanfare kind of storytellers in the musical realm. They underline things, they highlight things, they put exclamation points on things. And a lot of scores, and this can work fine, this is just sort of a general trend, but a lot of scores just kind of fade into the background and they're fine and they kind of tell the story. But when your storytelling as a filmmaker is this is going to sound negative, but heavy-handed. This is not a subtle film. This is a very blunt film. This is hitting you with, this is stabbing you, and you're supposed to feel that way. No need to go by halves. Like, just really, really, really sell your story. Sell every plot point, sell every murder, sell every twist, sell every mystery. And that's the thing that makes this movie work. I think this movie is, more than anything else, in the telling, in the actual way that it conveys its story. And I think there's a chance that it's going to be a lot more powerful the first time, simply because that is the way it's structured. That is the way it's built, to have these constant revelations. I am curious to see this movie again and see, yeah, it'll make sense. I'm confident it was very cleverly told, but whether it will still have power, I wonder. Yeah. But here's the thing. That's okay. It's okay if it's just intended for the first time. That is fine too.
I think also when you talk about the highlighting and the intensity of it, that Giovanni Ribisi's use of color plays into that really masterfully as well. Because you'll notice, like, when she is at the height of her power, when she's manipulating the situation, when she's really in control, whether it's like the deep blue of that neon sign when they're parked outside the motel, or it's the deep red of her in the motel bathroom, you know, and like realizing, oh shit, he's a cop.
Yeah.
And then at that moment, seizing upon, like, okay, here's what I know I have to do.
Yeah.
The color is really at its most lurid, most vibrant.
Yeah.
And then as she's dying in the front of the pickup truck, as she's been shot, the color steadily, slowly drains away from that long single take.
Real spoilers, by the way. We were not kidding.
I told you we were going to do this.
It's just right up to the end. And that's totally fine.
Let's do it.
I think you're right. I think you're right, though. And I think there's a lot of attention to that kind of detail. And I like how when everything is revealed, or when it would have been revealed if you were watching it chronologically, everything's taking place in the harsh light of day. There's something just really remarkable about that. It is possible to tell a familiar story in an unfamiliar way, or just so strikingly that it feels fresh again.
Yeah.
And I've seen horror movies with similar tactics, telling it out of order, trying to make you, like, pull the rug out from you. Haha, you didn't think they were the killer. I've seen it done. I've seen it done badly, and I've seen it done well. I've rarely seen it done with this much of like a crowd impacting, like kind of vibe, in a way that really feels earned, and it really feels like it worked. It's not Hitchcockian really in a technical sense, but it has a similar impact. Like, I wasn't around when Psycho came out, and I can only imagine how those big moments, how those big twists hit. And I don't want to oversell this, because comparing it to Psycho is a lot. Psycho is one of, like, the game-changing films in all of cinema. There's before Psycho and after Psycho. But it does have that power where it just arrests you when it's at its best. And it's at its best most of the time. And that's impressive. This is a really, really impressive film.
Let's talk about Willa Fitzgerald and what this role requires of her physically, in terms of the language, in terms of her body language. She's got to keep you guessing. And even when you realize what's happening here and who she is, like, I'll speak for myself, I kind of wanted her to get away with it. Like, she's such a fascinating figure that I'm like, oh, how is she going to get out of this? And I wanted that for her. She didn't become villainous in my mind once I realized she was a serial killer. I'm like, oh, she's tricky.
She is tricky. And I do think that, well, they never do like a deep dive into how she became a serial killer, what her specific motivation is for being a serial killer. And I know it's psychology, it's complicated, but usually in a movie, they'll try to pin it down to one thing. Oh, I saw my mom cheating on my dad with Santa Claus, and now I'm a Santa Claus killer. I've seen that at least twice. And that would be acceptable because it gives the audience some sense of, oh, I understand where they're coming from. Here you have to pick it up from her cues. She says a little bit about sort of her warped sense of reality, but a lot of it is whenever there's a woman around her, she says, I don't want to kill you. She will if she has to, but she says, I don't want to. And that's clearly important to her. This is clearly someone who, she has a speech at the beginning where she's talking about how, you know, casual sex for men doesn't seem like that big a deal, but for a woman, even if maybe you were interested in it, there is always the threat of violence from men. And one gets the impression that that probably is something that she has dealt with firsthand or in some immediate sense, and that this is all some kind of violent retribution for that. But we don't see that directly.
And we don't have to.
We don't have to, no. And it's actually cool that the movie is willing to give us credit to figure these things out. I love her performance in this. There's something she does in the towards the end, which is actually, I think, technically chapter 2, where she has been shot. She's been like shot in the ear. And a lot of movies, you know, you'd be bleeding and you go, but then you move on because it's a movie. She keeps like adjusting her jaw when she talks, like afterwards, like in the middle of it, in a very almost universal horror kind of monstrous way. Like, and that's something that is such a great punctuation of her story. It's a great little detail, and it keeps everything in play. It keeps everything alive. It gives you, it doesn't forget something because it's inconvenient to the scene playing out. It actually thinks about all the details and how they will play out throughout this entire narrative. It's good. It's a good movie. Yeah.
Also, like, she has to be funny, which is very surprising at times. Like when she finds out what kind of car she's about to steal.
Yeah, I know.
I laughed out loud at that line. Like this movie is at its most suspenseful. We don't know how we feel about her. And then she laughs at the fact that she's about to steal a Pinto. Yeah. I love the production design. Like everything in the house where Ed Begley Jr. and Barbara Hershey live feels so lived in. All that kitsch feels like people who have just like hunkered down, and this place has not changed in decades. And so I like that. And weird little things like they're doing a Scott Baio like Chachi puzzle. Like, that's weird.
And that's something that I like that they even say, like when Willa Fitzgerald sees that, their first thought is to say, we're not that into Scott Baio. It's just, we got this at a yard sale. A lot of these kinds of serial killer, slasher, horror stories in your face, get you excited, get you out of the theater. They're very blunt and they're very direct in a way that doesn't feel intelligent. It just feels like we're trying to get your attention. And that can be fine too. But here's one that is doing that and actually backs it up. It is genuinely intelligent. It is, I think, thematically complicated to the point where I'm still mulling over how I feel about that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. I actually think that's a complicated
How often does it happen?
Right. I'm not saying this movie is doing this and it's bad. I'm saying that we actually need to engage with that and ask ourselves that question. And I would argue that it does so in such a way that you can have this conversation afterwards, as opposed to having to go, oh God, what a horrible sexist film or something. I think it's more complicated than that, and I love that about it.
I mentioned how great Gallner is in this too, because he does not have the arc that Willa Fitzgerald has, but we have to feel differently along the way about him. He stays essentially the same, and we feel differently about him based on the information we receive. And there's a hint of like bad stuff going on in his background. Like he's a cop, but something's happened. Like maybe he's not a good cop.
No, there's a moment where another cop like sees something in his pocket and he's like, oh, not again. Like that kind of thing. And that again speaks to a lot of rich detail that isn't necessarily explored in the film. Gallner is one of Hollywood's secret weapons, and I don't think Hollywood knows it yet, because he's been great since at least Veronica Mars. Like he was devastating in Veronica Mars, and every time he pops up in something, when you see Gallner, you're like, oh, this is going to be good. This role is covered. He is going to be fantastic in Smile, for example. And here he really gets to take center stage in a way he hasn't, I think, in like a couple of times recently, but not enough throughout his career. And he nails it. He understands how he needs to be subtly terrifying in a way that can be misinterpreted, and then when he also needs to be terrifying but for the right reasons. I keep saying this. What a good film. It's a good film. You know, it does the good in it. It does good things.
What is your number on this good film?
I am going to give it an 8.5. I think it is incredibly striking, and I think it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a horror fan. Yeah, it's really impressive. I'm going to mull this over, though, and by the end of the year, my opinion might grow.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to say 9.3 because again, it's got a lot of Pulp Fiction in it. It is not reinventing that wheel, but it is creating an exquisitely tense, like beautifully detailed, like powerfully well thought out, powerfully acted film that for sure sticks with you. So I'm so glad it exists in the world. So Strange Darling, let us know what you thought. Get into spoilers with us. And Bibbs, you're the best for being here. Thank you to you and your cat.